and welcome to the Oxygen Addict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you can perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OA23 over at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and every week I bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you. A couple of things you can do for me before we get started, please. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe. That really helps the growth of the show. And if you're looking for help and advice with your training, be that triathlon, endurance, running, swimming, biking, any of those, please get in touch if you think we can help. The email is help@oxygenaddict.com, or there's a link in the show notes below, and we'll do our best to get back to you. All right. If you are also listening on a podcast player, what I'd ask is if you hit follow on the podcast player, that really helps the show rank in the podcast players. So the more people we can reach, the more people we can help. That'd be a really big thing you can do for us. It would help us out. Thanks so much. So on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about how to plan your ultimate triathlon training camp. It's a really big hot topic of conversation amongst my athletes at the moment because we are approaching training camp season. Whether athletes are coming away with me and our other Team OA coaches on our training camps, or whether they've got other training camps, or whether they're arranging their own training camps, it always comes around at this time of year to how do I get the most out of the time I've got while I go away to just focus on my training. So that is the pure focus of this episode. We're going to be talking exactly how you can make the most of your limited training time while you're away on a training camp. Now, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, precisionfuelandhydration.com. They have got an amazing fueling and hydration planning tool on the website. It'll allow you to work out how many grams of carbohydrate per hour you and your body need for the events you're doing. It'll also help you work out how many milligrams of sodium you're going to need to help keep you hydrated. And it's especially relevant if you're going away to do a training camp and it's going to be hotter than the weather that you're usually used to. And let's be honest, let's hope it is going to be hotter than the weather you're usually used to if you're going away on a camp. Really important to keep on top of both the fueling and the hydration every day. Well, it is anyway in everyday training, but especially so in a training camp where it might be much hotter than you're used to. Your ability to train the next day is largely going to depend on how well you fuel and how well you stay hydrated during that day's sessions and after that day's sessions. So if you're completely new to this and you've got no idea, it is possible to get a really accurate first idea of the number of grams of carbohydrate, milligrams of sodium you're going to need for your own body and the conditions you'll be facing. Head on over to precisionfuelandhydration.com, use their free fueling and hydration planning tool, and it'll give you a really good first place to start. If you then want to buy some stuff from them, you can use the code OA23. That'll give you 15% off your first order. But the great thing about their website is it's largely educational. There's loads of stuff on there that's there for free. And if you end up buying stuff from them as well, I think brilliant, because I think they're a fantastic company with great products. But the information and the education you get from being there is more important, I think. Now, even if you're an existing athlete and you haven't looked at this for a while, remember that training in the heat and training in the summertime is very different to training in the winter and training in the cold. So it's worth going over there and having a refresh and just remembering what your numbers are, get them straight in your head so you can start fueling at the appropriate rate and getting the sodium in at the appropriate rate. Okay, so on to today's show. As I've said, I want to spend today's topic talking about how we plan your ultimate triathlon training camp. First up, I want to talk about the reason behind the training camp. And it's super important to do that because it won't be the same for everybody. And it's a really important first port of call for you to decide what exactly is it that you want to get out of a training camp. It might be that you've never been on one before and you've heard people talk about them. You know the idea of going away and getting some extra training in with your friends. But a word to the wise, if you don't plan when you go away to do a training camp, the chances are you're going to fall foul of a few of the four horsemen of the training camp apocalypse. So the thing you've got to be really clear on is what is the major goal for why you're going away to do the training. And I would suggest, if you're not sure, the main goal of you going away to do a training camp is to get lots of extra higher volume aerobic training done in a better environment, better weather conditions than you would face at home. The better weather conditions are going to be much more conducive to you training outdoors, and the being away on the camp is going to be much more conducive to you being able to focus just on your training. But it's super important to zoom in on that first thing that I said, which is make the key priority of your camp to be extra aerobic volume. Now, the reason I'm stating that really clearly is it's not very common to go away with people who are just like you, who just have the same level of fitness as you. That can be both a positive and a negative, but you need to be clear what your reason for going is and what your boundaries on, especially on your riding, are going to be, so that you don't end up doing somebody else's training and you don't end up essentially burning yourself out. And the last thing I want you to do is have a training camp where you're away for a week, you just barely get through the training that you've got done on the week, and then you need to take 2 or 3 weeks either off completely, or you get sick or ill or injured when you get back, or you're just too tired to do anything meaningful. So I'd suggest to you, point number one on this camp is we want you to do as much training as you can absorb and recover from in order to go back into normal training within a week of returning. And that's really important. Ideally, you're going to have a day or two of easy training when you get back, and you'll roll right back onto your training plan. If you have to take an entire week, 2 weeks of really low volume or rest because you've absolutely worn yourself out on the training camp, you may as well not have gone in the first place. It's a nice experience and you'll have some war stories to tell, but it isn't the smartest way to go about it. So that's the first thing I would say. Aim to do as much training as you can and absorb and recover from. Now, that might mean that you have to make some difficult choices around the people you're away with, but you have to make the choices that are right for you. And you have to make the choices that mean you're going to get more volume than you would usually do, but you can roll back into your normal training relatively quickly when you get back. And that's a skill that not many people are able to do. The second thing I would give you a warning about here is it's what we should be cautious of on the training camp. And again, it's easy to see the answer to this. If the thing we're looking for is an increased volume of steady aerobic training, the thing that we've most got to be cautious of is the higher intensity training that we might end up doing almost possibly by accident, but also sometimes possibly by design as well. So I'll give you an example of this. An athlete of mine is going away to do a training camp on one of the Canarian Islands that's organized by another company. The athlete sent me through the menu of training for the week, essentially. And this athlete's first response was, I'm really worried. I've paid all this money to go in this camp and there's no way I can get through it. There are all these things that I'm looking at. I'm really, really scared I'll get through the week. So the first thing I said to the athlete was, you don't have to do all the sessions every day. A good coach is going to understand that you're going to pick and choose the sessions that work for you and get you a camp that gets you the goal that you want. So for example, on this particular camp, there were several sets of hard hill reps planned in on the bike. There were hard hill runs planned in on the run. And there were 2 track sessions planned in as well, high intensity interval sessions on the track. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it was wrong for the athlete that we're talking about here. So it would have been easy for this athlete to go and do those sessions and end up really overtrained. And the athlete is quite close to a very big goal race of theirs this year as well. Possibly, potentially be flirting with injury as well from too much higher intensity running that they're not used to. That's the thing I would say you need to be most cautious of doing. Anything where it's organized by somebody else, by a company or a coach that you don't know, that looks a bit generic and is very different to the training that you've been doing recently, especially the higher intensity stuff, do not be afraid at all to either skip the session, do the session at a low intensity, or just make sure that the camp works for you. That would be my advice there. So let's go back to how we want your camp to look. I would give you the advice, if you're a triathlete here looking to race in the European summertime, we all know The winter times in Europe can be difficult to train through, and it's great to get away to the better weather and be able to do some riding outdoors. So most of your training dollars, if you like, are going to be spent training on the bike. And I would encourage you to build your week around the idea of riding your bike every day, 5 or 6 days during the 7 days that you're away. Build it mainly around those aerobic training hours, and then fit in your swimming and your running around that. So typically on the camps that we organize, we'll have rides that are generally anywhere from 3 to 5 hours long. Standard ride would be, I guess, 3 hours long on most days. A longer ride, or perhaps two longer rides of up to 5 or 6 hours, and a couple of recovery rides during that week as well. So typically we'll do 1 or 2 days of longer rides, a recovery ride, a longer ride, a recovery ride, and typically we'll end the week with a really long ride and make that the focus of the week. And even if an athlete hasn't been doing that volume of cycling, what we find is you do get fitter during the week. It's something you don't usually experience in a standard week at home. But when you've just got the training to focus on, you do have a noticeable feeling of your fitness increasing during a week. Now, I don't have a real scientific explanation for that, because all the literature says that that shouldn't happen and you shouldn't feel that way. It's certainly been the case on all the camps I've been on so far, that we get to the end of it and people have a real sense that they are fitter and capable of doing more than they were 5, 6, 7 days earlier. So you can do much more training while you're away, but I would encourage you to spend your time focusing on that bike training. And we'll go into more detail later on what that bike training is going to look like. But if all you did every day was to ride for a few hours at a steady pace, you would come back with a whole ton of fitness in your body at the end of the week that you wouldn't need a huge amount of recovery time from. It's very safe in terms of injury risk. Wouldn't be like doing a high run volume week. And you'll come back, you'll absorb that really quickly. You'll be able to roll back into your usual training relatively quickly. Within 2 or 3 days, I would say you'll be back on your normal training plan, and you'll have what could potentially be, I don't know, between 12 and 17 hours of cycling in your body across a 7-hour period, which is possibly more cycling volume than you would have in 3 usual weeks at home. And it is possible to absorb that, but only if you're really clear and you're very, very strict with yourself on the levels of intensity that you allow yourself to do. So being really disciplined is really important there. What we would then do on top of the cycling is we'd look at the ways we can add in our swimming and our running. And I'd look at swimming next. If you're away somewhere where the weather's good, often camps that you go away to in Mallorca, in Canary Islands, places like this, will have an outdoor swimming pool, and it's fantastic to be able to swim outdoors in the sunshine. Possibly you'll be able to do some open water swimming as well, which might not have been possible in the wintertime where you lived. So getting the chance to do those swims is really, really great. But again, what we want to be careful of here is not falling into the trap of swimming really hard. And it's possible to do that without really realizing it on a training camp. So I'm going to say the focus of your week should be on trying to get a qualified coach to look at your stroke, give you feedback on your stroke, and then practice specific drills that are going to help improve your swim stroke. And then B, easy aerobic swimming, focusing on practicing embedding those technique changes into your stroke. We want to really minimize the amount of hard swimming that you're going to do for the majority of age groupers. And again, you could possibly look at swimming possibly every day while you're away. You're not going to go from swimming once a week to swimming 6 times a week for an hour, but if you can get in the pool every other day for a 45-minute to 60-minute session, and then every other day for even 15 or 20 minutes worth of working on your stroke flaws, it's possible to see a massive difference in your stroke mechanics in 1 week. You'll certainly feel much better for it. But the key is to not make that training aerobically stressful. The great news is, if you get the right drills, if you get to practice the correct drills, they can embed really quickly with practice during that week. And doing little and often is a great way to do that. I remember when we were at our France training camp last year, some of our athletes We had a pool right next to the chateau. Some of the athletes were getting in twice a day, and the second swim might just be for 10 minutes, just practicing a few of those drills and trying to embed them. But it can be a great thing to do at the end of a long ride, just to get in the water after you've showered and have a really quick swim, working on embedding those stroke changes that you've been working on all week. And again, really great opportunity to have a qualified and experienced coach look at your stroke and give you a tip for something that you can work on and improve that week. If you get the chance to have some video analysis while you're there as well, even better. But I think that's a really great thing to do. Plan in the idea of, I've got a swimming pool here. I'm going to try and get in the water at least 3 times, ideally even more than that, and try and work on improving my stroke flaws. Now, the last part of a training camp I'll look at putting in, and I'll be really flexible about this with my athletes. And sometimes athletes don't like to hear this idea of flexibility. They like to see a menu of training set out, and the job is tick all these sessions off. But what I'm going to say here is, try to make sure that the running that you do, you're sure you're going to recover from for the next day. So you've got to be fearless in skipping a run, and you've got to be fearless in cutting a run short if you're very tired from a bike session that you've done today, because you have to take a view for the whole 7 days that you're away. Now, some of you listening to this might already be running 6 days a week already. And in that case, you can continue to do those runs. But for the majority of age groupers, the running is where our injury risk is, and running tired is where our injury risk is. So be really careful and really aware about planning those runs in. Typically, most of the runs I'll plan into a training camp will be the last thing in a day, after people have come back from a ride and had a rest and had a nap, and then think about doing the run. And only if you're feeling up to it and feeling great, to go out and do the run. In most cases, a training camp where an athlete gets to run 3 times for 30 minutes is absolutely perfect on a bike overload week. And a lot of coaches raise their eyebrows when I say that, and a lot of athletes raise their eyebrows when I say that. But I bring it back to the first thing we talked about, which is, what is the aim of our camp? The aim of our camp is to get high volume aerobic miles done on the bike. And if running is going to interfere with that, then short runs of 20 to 30 minutes are absolutely fine to keep you ticking over while you're away. We're not necessarily looking to put a massive volume of running in for all but our very, very most experienced, most highly trained age groupers. For everybody else, keep your eyes on the focus of the week for what it's mainly there for. Okay? So that takes us through point 1, the increased training volume idea. What is the purpose of our training camp? Point 2 of today's chat is to talk about the effect that having ideal weather conditions is going to have on you as an athlete and have on your training as an athlete. It is one of the best reasons for going away on a training camp. And all being well, fingers crossed, you'll have perfect weather every day while you're away. It won't be too hot. You won't get too many days where it rains at all. In an ideal world, it won't rain at all while you're away. You'll be able to train in the sun every day. It's not always going to work out perfectly, and you're going to have to be flexible, but going away and having good weather is a real massive benefit for you. It's so much easier for you to get up in the morning to a blue sky and face another day of riding than it is to get up in the morning and face the rain. I think this is probably the second most important thing after the going away to do the extra miles thing, is the conditions you'll find yourself in. Take advantage of the fact you're away in better weather, and know that you'll possibly wake up some mornings feeling really tired and be wondering with yourself whether you should have a rest day today or not at some points. Almost certainly, I would say, get yourself started out there. You can always come back to your hotel, but get out and get yourself started, because getting out and training in the sun has a way of sort of refreshing your soul that trying to ride at home in the rain might not do. So the better weather conditions are better for riding your bike. Obviously, they're better for swimming because you're surrounded by this warm weather and it makes it desirable to get in the water, and it makes it easier to get out and run. But the main thing I think that it really helps with is better recovery conditions. Once you've finished with your training for the day, Having good weather means that you've got the choice then to relax in the sunshine. In fact, weirdly, even if you decide to relax in your hotel room and it's sunny outside, it'll help you relax and recover faster. But I'd really encourage you to try and get yourself out into the sunshine and take advantage of being in nature as much as you can and recover outdoors. Even if that looks like lying on a sun lounger, try and get yourself outside into the sunshine and take advantage of it. Now, the better weather comes with a couple of caveats. There are two really important things you're going to have to look at ensuring. If it is particularly warm and sunny while you're away, you're going to have to make sure you take care of sun cream. It is the number one thing that can ruin your warm weather training camp is if you get sunburnt on the first day. So a couple of things it's worth doing. Get some really decent sun cream that isn't going to sweat off. So they make specific brands that are really, really good for basically allowing you to sweat through the sun cream. The cheapest supermarket ones are not great at that, but some of the better, more sport specific ones can be really, really good. So invest a little bit of money into that. Make sure you get it on your body first thing in the morning when you wake up in the training camp. Get it on every time you go back to your hotel room because you want to be protected from getting burnt and protected from the UV. It's going to be a really uncomfortable time for the rest of the week if you get yourself sunburnt. So take care of sun protection. The second thing you need to really make sure you take care of in the heat is calories and electrolytes and hydration. Staying hydrated, and that means both water and an appropriate level of electrolytes for you, is the key thing really in order to ensure that you can train again the next day when paired up with the appropriate fueling while you're out on your rides. So I can't stress this enough. I've talked on every podcast about the importance of getting your hydration correct and getting your electrolytes correct, getting your fueling correct. A lot of athletes say to me on training camps, coach, I've heard you say this on the podcast, but really, if I'm training indoors, I often do a turbo session and sometimes I won't even have a drink of water through the whole thing, let alone fuel and have electrolytes properly. But on a training camp, if I don't take care of that from the very first 15 minutes we're out riding, it's possible to feel really, really underfueled, unpleasant, and not get through the sessions. So I can't stress this enough. You need to plan ahead of time for your training camp. Know how many calories you're going to need to get through the camp and plan a way to get those in on every ride. So that might involve you taking a huge bag of gels and chews with you. Precision Fuel and Hydration ones are great, for a word from our sponsors, but there are other brands available. But you're going to need, I'm going to say rough ballpark here, a gram of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per hour, rough rule of thumb. So a 60 kilo person needs 60 grams an hour, 75 kilo person needs 75 grams an hour, give or take. That's a rough rule of thumb for you. If you're going out to do a 5-hour ride, all of a sudden you sit down and realize there is a significant amount of planning needs to go into this ride to take those calories with me. You might be able to buy some stuff while you're out there. Coffee shops and cafes are great for that along the way, but you need to be carrying a significant amount of your own calories so that you can stay fueled, you can stay hydrated, and you can keep your electrolyte levels up, both to get through that day's training and to make sure you don't get depleted, to protect your ability to train on the next days as well. So make sure you've thought of that before you go. I would highly recommend taking with you Precision Fuel and Hydration electrolyte sachets with you. They take up no room or weight in your luggage. It's really hard to get them when you get out there. I would advise you taking your own favorite gels and chews as well with you, but they're easier to come by. You can end up buying anything from a supermarket for the carbohydrates. The electrolytes are something that, in the desert, everyone has to carry their own water. The saying goes in the army, you have to carry your own electrolytes with you and look after yourself, because it can really make a massive dent in your day. It can ruin the ride, and it can mean you're not going to be able to train well again the next day. The third great thing about going away on a training camp is the camaraderie and support of the people around you. So if you've never experienced this, for our athletes who are coming away on training camps with us, being able to go away and train with people who either you know or you don't know yet, but who have a common goal of trying to get the same kind of training for the same kind of events done, can be massively motivating. And knowing that you have to show up at 9 o'clock for the ride the next day to meet people to ride with, can be massively motivating in a way that if you're at home on a dark and rainy Sunday with no one to train with, it's very easy to decide to either not do the ride or just get on Zwift and do an hour. It's a really brilliant thing about the training camp environment, having people around who you will, make friends with, but also you'll aspire to be more like. I guarantee on every camp, you'll find somebody to look to who's done something that you want to do, or has done an event that you want to do, or who has a methodology of training that inspires you to do something. It can just really help you get long duration sessions done. You'll learn an awful lot from the people around you just by chatting to them. But being in that environment where people are totally focused on their training for a week can be really, really powerful. And that's not to mention, if you're a remotely coached athlete and your coach isn't local to you and you don't see them very often, having your coach alongside you at the camp, being able to interact with them multiple times a day and get feedback from them on your performance on those days can be massively, massively helpful as well. Okay, the fourth great thing about going away in a training camp is the opportunity to explore a new area and the variety of riding, running, and swimming that you're going to face. Just having fresh routes and scenery can breathe new life into training. Having better tarmac to ride on, especially if you can get to an iconic location to go and train in, that can be massively inspiring. So I talked earlier about the Canaries, about Mallorca, about getting out to the mountains in places like the Pyrenees and the French Alps. Being in a different environment can really inspire you. And every time we do a camp and we come back from it, both as athletes and coaches, we're amazed by how new life has been breathed into some of the athletes, and it can really set them on fire for an event that's coming up this year. And if you're at home at the moment thinking, I've entered this Ironman in the summer or this half Ironman in the summer, and I'm kind of really not feeling it at the moment, that's okay. Know that a lot of other people feel the same as you do at the moment. Getting yourself booked onto a training camp is a really good way to fire you up. And I guarantee you'll feel differently after day 1 of the camp, let alone after day 7 of the training camp. It'd be a really effective way to get yourself fired up. Now, we've talked a lot about training, but I really want to make a point for point number 5 about the effect that a training camp can have on your recovery time and how much enhanced your recovery can be by being on a training camp. Your ability to absorb the training is the key thing here. And I'm going to reiterate to you, there's no point doing training that you can't recover from. If you are recovering from a day's training, ready to train again the next day, that's brilliant. But if you put yourself in a hole so deep you can't train again the next day, it's really suboptimal for a training camp. And a training camp environment is great in that all you've got to focus on is the training, the eating, the going to bed and recovering ready for the next day. It's almost as though normal life is suspended for the time that you're away. There's no work to do. There are no, much reduced family interactions on the thing, which, let's be honest, we all miss our families when we're away doing these things. But there's a payback for it as well. And I always think the guilt that I feel when I'm away, I have to replace that with something. And the replacement side of it is I get to be recovered and I get to get more sleep and I get to get the naps in the afternoon that I just don't have when I'm at home. So I'd encourage you, if you're an athlete with a family who's going away for some time away from their family, it is natural to feel that little pang of guilt, but accepting that that's going to happen and doing something to mitigate it before you go or after you go. It's all a game of give and take after all. The time that you're then away, you can have guilt-free to focus on the fact you now can recover from the training that you're doing. It's absolutely amazing how much more training you can get done and recover from when all you have to do is train and recover from the training. And that's one of the reasons you'll see pro triathletes go away to do camps, pro cyclists go away to do camps. These are people who that's their job every day, day after day, just to train and recover. The being on the camp aspect is getting the extra sleep, scheduling a nap, scheduling a massage, someone else doing the cooking for you. There's no cleaning to do or housework around the apartment. That's a really big thing that takes stuff off your plate and means all you have to focus on is recovering from the training that you're doing. The 6th part about our training camps is the comprehensive care you'll get as an athlete. You'll have your meals cooked for you. This is massive in terms of recovering. Having meals ready prepared, just going down to breakfast and being able to have the breakfast ready, coming back from a ride and having the lunch or the dinner ready there for you. And ideally in the hotels that we go to for our camps, it's a kind of buffet style food where it's just there and it's ready to go. You can eat as much as you like when you're hungry. It's fantastic. I've already mentioned in your accommodation, you don't have to think about cleaning. You don't have to think about tidying up your own possessions. It's you, your bike, the bag you brought with you. So there's no stress around that. And the route planning and logistics for the rides, the runs, and the swims are all done for you and taken care of. And if you're a self-planning athlete going away to do your own camp, I'd really advise you to have that plan for the week written out ahead of time so you know exactly what you've got planned out. Have the routes planned out ahead of time. Upload them into your Garmin to select from so that you don't have to be thinking about trying to do that when you're tired away on camp. Some of the best camps we've had are the ones where we've gone away, a few of us, to an apartment in Lanzarote. We've got all the rides already planned into our Garmins and uploaded into the Garmins, and we just have to select them for the next day and say, right, tomorrow we'll do the Mirador ride. We'll pick ride number 4 from our list and all the logistics. Conversely, some of the toughest camps we've been on are the ones where we haven't done that ahead of time. Sometimes where we've just gone out for a ride and we've tried to use a map on a Google phone to ride around and we've got lost and we don't know how to get through the center of a town. That's something you can take care of. So, like I said, the camps that we organize for our athletes, all that's done already. The athletes will have the routes that they can download the night before the ride. They'll know exactly where they're going. And it takes away all of those worries for an athlete. So take care of that if you're organizing it yourself. Point number 7 about going on a training camp is the value of having expert coaching and guidance. So I can't stress this enough. If you're going away on an organized camp, it is a fantastic opportunity to have somebody else who's developed professional skills look at your technique on the swim, on the bike, on the run, and give you guidance around how you can change your technique and how you can improve your technique in person. Now, even with running, it's possible to sit and think, well, what can I learn skill-wise about running that I don't know already? Athletes are often amazed when they come on our camps and we do our running skill session about the number of things you can think about to help improve your run form without really needing to change too much that's complex. A coach can look at what you're doing and say, right, here are 3 or 4 cues I want you to think about as you're running. Similarly, with things like descending on the bike, it's possible to be given a couple of really good tips by someone who's a really good descender on the bike, and it will immediately change your confidence and your ability to descend, going down corners much faster, knowing when to brake. Those skills can be developed, but only really in a face-to-face coaching situation. It's not very easy to give someone coaching on downhill cycling technique over the internet. So having coaches there in person can be a massive part of the skill development. It's a really good chance to talk with your coach if you're on a camp where you're remotely coached by your camp and your coach is with you. That can be really invaluable as well. But regardless of where you are, try and get someone to look at your technique and try and leave with one tip for your swimming, for your biking, and for your running, where you think this is something I can take home from the camp with me and improve my technique to move myself on to the next level. We've talked a little bit there about point 8, skill development. There's lots of different skills you can learn when you're away on your training camp. I talked earlier about swim coaching. It is really valuable to have someone cast an eye over your swim stroke and just say, right, there's one point here that I want you to work on. That can change your swimming to the next level, just having that one tip given to you. Hill climbing on the bike, descending on the bike, the chance to be under the watchful eye of an experienced coach is really valuable for you. So make the most of that while you're away and try and go home with those tips of the things you'll transfer back to training when you get home. And finally, the last thing, point number 9 that I think you'll take away from a training camp is long-term motivation. In my experience, a camp can instill lasting motivation and inspiration into an athlete long after the camp has ended. And I think that's ultimately one of the most important things to take away from it. Often athletes focus on an event at the expense of focusing on the process to get there. And it's an interesting comparison to run. The price of a training camp where you're away for 7 days against the price of entering an event where you're away to do an event for 1 day. Sometimes athletes need to take a step back and say, what would I get more from in the long-term view of my life? And when I look back over my athletic career, it's interesting. I look back on training camps that I've done with as much, if probably more fondness than a lot of the events that I did, because they were so much more experience based rather than performance and outcome based. I loved the experience of being away with people who were just like me, who wanted to train in environments just like me. And I think that you can make some friendships and get motivated by people while you're away and carry that back to you to really fire up your training for the rest of the season. So I think a long-term motivation that lasts after you come back can be a real unexpected but massive bonus of going away and doing a training camp. Okay, so I hope I've inspired you. I hope you're sitting there at the moment. If you're not booked onto a training camp this year, I hope it's given you pause for thought. I hope it's made you think that's something that I would really benefit from. And if it is, have a look around, see if you can go away with a friend or see if you can book onto an organized training camp. I really believe you'll get a massive amount from it. And even if in your first attempt, it's a weekend away somewhere with one friend that you go away just for the purposes of training, you'd be amazed how much more you can get done in a couple of days away from home than you would get done in a couple of days at home. So that just about brings us to the end of this week's episode. Before we wrap this up, there's a couple of discount codes and deals for you. Go over to precisionfuelandhydration.com and use the code OA23 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. And again, if you're looking for help with coaching, over at teamoxygenaddict.com. I think we've got the most comprehensive endurance sports coaching program for busy age groupers, be it for triathlon, running, swimming, cycling. We've got training plans for just about every event you can imagine. If you need help with your training, please get in touch. There's a link in the show notes or under the video in YouTube. You can book a call with me and the team straight to our calendars, and we can have a chat for up to 30 minutes to find out how we can best help you out to become the athlete that you want to be this year. So yeah, if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I'm not sure whether I'm the kind of athlete who should sign up for coaching, please just get in touch and have a chat with us. It's very interesting sometimes, the number of athletes who end up becoming coached by us. And the first thing that they say when I talk to them is, I'm a bit nervous about having booked this call because I don't really think that I'm the kind of person that you would work with. And when we get chatting, they're exactly the kind of person that we would work with. So click the link and let's have a chat and see how we can help you out. Okay, so link in the show notes. You don't have to remember them. And until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict podcast. See ya.